my name is Martin and welcome back to another video. This is Roddlesworth Falls and we're somewhere between Bolton and Preston, I think, in the woods. Anyway, I have something wonderful to show you. I'm going to go up there and I'm going to talk to you because the waterfall is very, very noisy. Right, sorry about that. That is, like I say, that is Roddlesworth Waterfall. Beautiful area. He's throwing it down. So in a minute you're going to get a big blob of water on the lens. We've come looking for something, and we're going to look in over this way, over the hill over here, through all these muddy forests. See if we can get through without sinking in the mud, as we already have done to get here. And if we find it, Bob's your uncle. So anyway, from the Roddlesworth Waterfall, we'll head up this way. So where are we this week? Well, if we take the town of Bolton, which is to the northwest of Manchester, as a reference, that's where we are, just towards Belmont, and I've put the what three words reference on, as some of you have asked for. Just throwing it down. just as we get to where we want to be, it's throwing it down. So, we've just walked down now from the waterfall, the Roddlesworth Waterfall, and we're here, just at a clearing in the woods. And we're going to look at the remains of an old house. Hollinshead Hall house, built in the late 1700s, I think the 1770s. It fell into ruin, but there's quite a bit to explore. So I'll show you the remains of this house, but there's a jewel in the crown that's complete. So when we've looked at the ruins, we'll go and take a look at this wonderful little grotto, shall we call it, this jewel in the crown. So let's go and take a look at the remains of the house. So this is the remains of Hollinshead Hall house. These remains date from the 1770s. I'll put the correct date on below. But Hollinshead Hall fell into disrepair. But there's been a house on this site since the 1300s, apparently. And one of the families dates back to the time of Henry VIII, so I've read. But in the 1770s, the house that was torn down and this structure was built. So this dates, like I say, 1770s. It's got quite a history. Apparently, the families that lived here, there's tales of them making merry and having great parties. So it sounds great, and it is really beautiful around here, and you could have probably a great party. I'll give you a history, a timeline on the house in the voiceover, because I'm going to read it for you and try and get it accurate. But absolutely amazing that this place is here and just gone to ruin, but it's quite a good ruin. I can't make out what all these rooms and what all this brickwork was. Apparently there was a stables here as well, but I'd love to know. But we're left just wondering what it all was. But it's a huge site, so it was obviously a grand house. So the earliest record we've got of a building on this site comes from the 14th century. There's a document that states in 1311, John de Radcliffe of the noted de Radcliffe family of Lancashire owned 100 hectares of land on this site at Hollinshead. The hall ruins that we see today are from 1776, when John Hollinshead built a new house on the site. It had previously been home to a large farmhouse dating over 100 years earlier. This was mostly demolished, making way for the new hall, and probably the well house too. Now the well house I'm going to show you shortly. After John's death, the property passed to his cousin William Brock, and the Brock Hollinshead family continued to live here until the early Victorian times. They were an old Lancashire family, and the notice board at the site states that they had many parties and merry revels at the hall. The hall was sold in 1845 to Eccles Shorrock, a well-known Blackburn mill owner, but by the early 1900s it had fallen into disrepair. In the early 1900s, Liverpool Corporation Waterworks bought the surrounding land to build new reservoirs, including the grounds of the hall. And alas, the hall, that had probably fallen into a real state of disrepair, was pulled down. And I've got that from lancashirepass.com. So James, have you noticed that despite the fact there was a huge house here
Yeah.
And I imagine it was huge looking at the ruins that are left. Have you noticed how there's not a lot of bricks around? There are some bricks, but a lot of the masonry is gone.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Don't know.
Well, apparently a lot of the masonry and the stonework from this house was taken by the farmers to build the dry stone walls in the area when the house fell into disrepair and in ruin, and when it was eventually demolished. And also some of it was used, the local village is called, I want to pronounce it Tockholes, but apparently it's pronounced Tockles. There's a local village just over the way called Tockles, and some of the stonework was taken over there to build houses in the local village, which is probably not a bad way to recycle the stone, really, is it? But it's good, it's proper solid stuff. But yes, that's what happened to it. So the house is or the house lives on, but in another form, in other buildings. I just love these two gateposts here. I'm guessing, I'm not quite sure, that this was the way in to the house, and there may have been some sort of courtyard here. Because the bulk of the house ruins are here. There are some more behind. There was a stable somewhere, but I can't make out what's what. But I love these great posts. Can you imagine when these were set in position in the late 1700s, and they're still here now? And the old bracket's still on there that there was would have had the gate on it. What a place it must have been. We can only imagine, can't we? Chin chin. Could do with a bit more milking.
Why is it too
Strong, yeah. So that's the house, the ruins of the house. But the jewel in the crown to this place is something that the servants would have probably dealt with, and people made a pilgrimage to. And that is just behind the camera. It's in its complete state, and it's the well house. It's absolutely fantastic. Take a look at this. So what sort of date have we got on the well house? Well, you would think it was the same as the house, late 1700s, but reading different sources, I think it comes out around the early 1800s. So whether they decided later that they'd make a bit of a thing of the spring and the well because of its healing properties and pilgrims that were coming here, whether they thought they'd sort of like make a little building around it, and it was done a bit later, I'm not quite sure, but it did fall into disrepair. Right, so if you come this way, I'll show you the spring, the source of all the water. It's just up here. Don't slip. Right, I've gone to slow motion to give myself some time to explain what I'm reading. So the spring was obviously predates the house and was probably the reason for early settlements here. The spring was a good source of fresh water. It was thought to have healing properties, and it was probably initially thought that by the early pagans, but later it was Christianized. I'm reading some information from one of the information boards on the site, and what it says is that the well house is very difficult to date. All they'll say is late 18th century, early 19th century, so that's all we get. It was refurbished by Liverpool Water Corporation because they owned a large part of the land round here in the early 1900s, and then later it was refurbished by volunteers in the 1970s, and they did a damn fine job. So we've got a spring, and we've got probably a place built so people could take the waters. Now, I mentioned the servants earlier, and I think that was because perhaps the servants came here and gathered the water. But let's just take a look at this spring at the back. So this is a kind of a trough. I mean, the water's just literally running off the hill there. Probably gathered here, but I'm not sure if there's a spring here as well. And it feeds down into the well house, so there's possibly a pipe where it feeds down into it. But apparently there was baptisms here. People were baptised in this trough as well. But from what I've read, they did do, like I say, religious ceremonies here.
Now, we made 2 visits to do this video. The second time we visited, the well house was firmly locked up, but the first time, well, I'll let you take a look. Now, it's claimed that the spring water here, the water that came into the well house, had healing properties.
And those healing properties were for conditions of the eye. Quite strange, but that's what they believed, that it healed ailments of the eye. Now, if you just take a look at this, if you come round here, we think this is beautiful. I just wonder if this would have had like a little spout here, and above, I'm wondering if it had a plaque on, the coat of arms on for the family. I think it did, I'm not quite sure. But the whole thing is just, I don't want to use the word, but I'm going to have to. It's quite charming. It's been described on some websites as a grotto. It really is wonderful. And what I also love, I wonder if it had a gate on, because if you look at this, these pillars here, either side, I wonder if it had some sort of gate on. And the water just flows out of it. You can see how absolutely stunning water here, and the water's just flowing downwards and out into the field behind. I've never been to a more wetter place, to be honest with you. There's just water everywhere here, just little streams and rivers and mud everywhere, hence the wellies. I think it's wonderful and well worth a visit. We're here in the middle of winter, but if you came here in summer it'd be lovely. I don't doubt still very wet, but it is a beautiful place to visit. So there you go, Hollinshead Hall Well House. So from here, this wonderful place, we're going to go to somewhere else now, just down the road. We're going to go to a castle. We're going to go to Liverpool Castle, but it's not in Liverpool. So join us on a short journey just down the road to Liverpool Castle. So this is Liverpool Castle, but as I said, it's not in Liverpool. We're just outside Bolton. In fact, if you remember the video we did about Rivington near Winter Hill, which is just over there in the hills, we're not far from there, we're just down the road. It was built by Lord Leverhulme, if you remember him, the businessman and philanthropist that built all sorts of wonderful things in the area. He built the pigeon loft, the gardens, the ornate gardens, and he built this. And although it looks medieval, it isn't.
Again, if we use Bolton as a reference, we're just through the town of Horwich, and there's easy access there from the M61 motorway.
like I say, the place looks medieval, but it wasn't built until 1912. Lord Leverhulme decided to have it commissioned to be built. And the reason he had it commissioned was because he thought this area reminded him of the place where the original Liverpool Castle was, over in Liverpool. And he thought, reminds me of a similar place, so I'll build a replica of Liverpool Castle and I'll build it here just outside Bolton. So, like I say, although it looks medieval and it looks fantastic, these fireplaces would have never have seen a fire. Nobody ever lived here because it was built, and it was built to look like the ruin of an old medieval castle.
Now apparently the site of the original Liverpool Castle was in Derby Square in Liverpool. Lord Leverhulme built this as one of his follies, a replica. Construction began in 1912 using local quarried gritstone, and it was a slow process with only a few stonemasons and labourers working on the project. It was never completed as the work stopped just after Lord Leverhulme's death in 1925. But it was never meant to look like a complete castle. He always intended it to look like a ruin, like Liverpool Castle would have looked after the Civil War apparently.
It looks proper old, doesn't it, with all the foliage on the outside. It does now actually resemble an old medieval castle, but I think that was Lord Leverhulme's intention, to build it back in 1912 and for it to stand over the years and eventually look like it was. I love the place, and I think I really like Lord Leverhulme, although I never knew him, but obviously a bit eccentric, a philanthropist, and he built wonderful structures like this with his money. He could have just sat on it and passed it down to the family, but he did things like this. Amazing stuff. Liverpool Castle. So this is Lower Rivington Reservoir, and Liverpool Castle is just there. Well, that's it. That's the end of the video. So the remains of Hollinshead Hall, the old well house, which I loved, that was my favourite bit, and Liverpool Castle, which is just up here, that's not in Liverpool. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks very much for watching. Take care, and I shall see you next time in the next video. Bye for now.